Victoria stared at the notice on the departmental board. Her name was highlighted in red. One of the students barred from final exams due to unpaid fees. While her classmates were discussing graduation gowns, Victoria was calculating how many days she had left before her dreams turned into dust. She had tried everything she could think of. She had prayed. She had reached out to relatives and friends. Some promised to help and never called back. Others simply ignored her messages. Out of desperation, she had even borrowed money from loan apps. The constant reminders and threat from debt collectors only added to her anxiety. Every night, she lay awake wondering if all the years she had spent struggling through school would end in failure. One Sunday morning, after another sleepless night, she decided to visit her church. As the service ended, she requested to see the pastor for counseling. Inside his office, Victoria explained everything. She spoke about her financial struggles, her unpaid fees, and her fear of being unable to graduate. The pastor listened carefully. He nodded occasionally and quoted a few scriptures about God's provision. When she finished speaking, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "My daughter, don't worry," he assured her. "God will make a way. Come back next weekend. Let me see what I can do for you." For the first time in weeks, Victoria felt hopeful. She thanked him and left. Throughout the week, she imagined that maybe the church would assist her. Perhaps that was a welfare fund. Maybe some wealthy member would sponsor her education. The following weekend, she returned to the church exactly as instructed. The pastor welcomed her into his office and locked the door behind her. Victoria thought nothing of it. He walked to a cabinet, opened it, and brought out a thick bundle of cash. Her eyes widened. There was far more money than she had expected. The pastor placed it on the table between them. "This money can solve your problem," he said. Victoria stared at the cash. The amount looked enough to pay her fees and settle several of her pressing debts. Tears almost formed in her eyes. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. The pastor smiled. "But there's something I want from you first." Victoria frowned. "What do you mean, sir?" The smile on his face changed. "I want us to spend some time together." She looked confused. "I don't understand, sir." The pastor leaned closer. "Come on, Victoria. You're an adult. You know exactly what I'm talking about." The meaning hit her immediately. Her heart sank. For a few seconds, she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The same man people called a servant of God. "Sir, no, I can't do that," she said quietly as she stood up. She picked up her bag and headed for the door. But before leaving, her mind began racing. The unpaid fees, the approaching examinations, the loan debts, the possibility of losing everything she had worked for over the years. The pastor continued talking. He told her she was overreacting. He told her nobody would ever know. He claimed he was helping her and deserved something in return. He spoke calmly, as though what he was proposing was completely normal. Victoria left the office that day determined never to return. But desperation has a way of weakening convictions. For days, she wrestled with the decision. She cried. She prayed. She tried once more to find help elsewhere. Nothing worked. Every door remained closed. Eventually, she called the pastor. That night, they met at a hotel. The encounter lasted only a few hours. When it was over, the pastor handed her the money. The weight of the silence in the hotel room was heavier than the bundle of cash the pastor eventually placed in her hand. He didn't look like a man of God anymore. He looked like a businessman who had just completed a transaction. Victoria didn't say a word. She took the money, her hand trembling. feeling as though she had sold a piece of her soul to buy a certificate. The following week, she paid her school fees. She settled part of her debts. She completed the necessary registrations for her examinations. Slowly, life began returning to normal. Days later, her final examination came and went successfully. She thought the entire incident was behind her. She was wrong. About 2 months later, Victoria began feeling unusually tired. At first, she thought it was stress, but the weakness continued. Then came the frequent headaches, body pains, occasional fever. Most alarming of all, she noticed she had missed her monthly period. Fear gripped her immediately. She bought a pregnancy test kit. The result was positive. Still hoping there had been a mistake, she visited the hospital for proper tests. The doctor confirmed it. Victoria was pregnant. The news hit her like a thunderbolt. She sat silently for several minutes after leaving the hospital. The pastor was the only man she had ever been with. There was no doubt about who the father was. A few days later, she gathered enough courage to visit his office. When she entered, the pastor appeared relaxed. That changed the moment she told him why she had come. His expression hardened immediately. "What did you just say?" he demanded. Victoria swallowed nervously. "I'm pregnant, sir." The pastor jumped to his feet. "Pregnant for who?" Victoria stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, you are the only—" "Stop right there!" he shouted. "Who do you think you are?" Victoria couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Sir, you know what happened?" The pastor scoffed. A cold, mocking sound that echoed in the small office. "You were smart enough to take the money, Victoria. Be smart enough to know when to disappear." He leaned over his desk, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. "I have a reputation to protect. Do you think anyone will believe a struggling student over a man of my standing?" Victoria felt her heart pounding. The man who had pursued her relentlessly was now pretending not to know her. The pastor continued. "Besides, you're not the first woman I have been with. Why are you the only one claiming pregnancy?" The word struck her like a slap. Then came the insult. He called her irresponsible. He accused her of sleeping around. He described her as a gold digger looking for someone to blame. He claimed she was trying to destroy his reputation. "You want to pin another man's child on me?" he said. "It will never happen." Victoria left the office in tears. For days, she struggled to process everything. Part of her still hoped he would come to his senses. Perhaps he had reacted out of fear. Maybe he simply needed time. A few weeks later, she returned. This time, she was determined to have a proper conversation with him. But things only got worse. The moment the pastor saw her, his face darkened. "I thought I warned you." Victoria tried to explain herself. He refused to listen. Instead, he threatened her. "If you continue coming here, I will have you arrested." She froze. The pastor pointed towards the door. "Leave before I call security." His voice dropped even lower. "And if you keep causing problems for me, you will regret it." Victoria left in shock. The threat frightened her. The insult hurt. The betrayal cut even deeper. That night, she cried until her eyes became swollen. Everything she had trusted had collapsed. The pastor had used her. Now he wanted to erase her completely. But she lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Another feeling slowly replaced her tears: determination. If the pastor believed she would simply disappear, he was mistaken. Then Victoria stopped crying. She wiped her face and reached for her phone, her eyes cold and focused. The pastor thought he had erased her, but he had only forgotten one thing. A woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous person in the world. By dawn, The first part of her plan was already in motion. The last Sunday of the month was Thanksgiving Sunday, one of the biggest services in the church calendar. Victoria knew the auditorium would be packed. Even people who usually sat at home would show up for the special service. She believed it was the perfect opportunity. That morning, she woke up early and prepared for church. She wore one of her best dresses, carefully applied her makeup, and looked calm on the outside. Inside, however, her heart was pounding. She knew that what she was about to do could change her life forever. Before the service started, she quietly submitted her name for the testimony session. As worship continued, she sat patiently in her seat. Several times, she considered changing her mind. Several times, fear tried to stop her. But whenever she remembered the insult, the threats, the humiliation she had suffered in the pastor's office, her resolve returned. The pastor sat confidently on the altar throughout the service. From where she was seated, Victoria occasionally glanced at him. He looked relaxed. He had no idea what was coming. When the testimony session finally began, different members came forward to share stories of God's goodness. The congregation applauded after each testimony. Then the announcer called her name. "Victoria, please come forward." She stood up. Her legs felt weak. The walk to the altar seemed longer than usual. When she reached the microphone, she smiled politely and greeted the congregation. "Good morning, church." The congregation responded warmly. Victoria began by thanking God. She spoke about her years in school. She talked about the financial challenges she had faced. She described the countless nights she cried because she couldn't afford her fees. Many people nodded sympathetically. Some even murmured prayers for her. Then she explained how she almost missed her final examinations because of her financial difficulties. The atmosphere in the church became emotional. People listened attentively. Victoria continued, "But God sent help through someone." The church immediately began clapping. Even the pastor smiled slightly, but Victoria wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and looked down at the screen. At first, it appeared as though she was reading notes she had prepared. Then her voice became firmer. "The person who helped me demanded something in return." The clapping stopped. A strange silence spread through the auditorium. Victoria continued, "He offered to pay my school fees if I agreed to sleep with him." People exchanged confused glances. The pastor's smile disappeared. A few church leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Victoria raised her head and looked directly at the congregation. The person who made that offer was our pastor. A collective gasp swept through the church. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It felt as if the entire building had frozen. Victoria calmly continued speaking. She explained how desperation had pushed her into making a decision she regretted. She told them about the hotel meeting, the money, and the pregnancy. Then she described how the pastor denied responsibility, insulted her, and repeatedly pressured her to terminate the pregnancy. Shock spread across the congregation. Several church officials hurried towards the altar. One of them reached for the microphone. "That's enough," he said. Victoria stepped back. "Don't touch me." Then she did something nobody expected. She lifted her phone and placed the speaker near the microphone. A voice suddenly echoed through the auditorium. The church instantly fell silent. Everyone recognized the voice. It belonged to the pastor. Unknown to him, Victoria had secretly recorded one of their conversations during a visit to his office. The recording played clearly. Every word was audible. The congregation listened as the pastor denied responsibility for the pregnancy. They heard him tell her to get rid of the baby. They heard him insult her. Then came the statement that sent another wave of shock through the building. "You are not the first woman I've been with," his voice said. The words echoed through the church. People looked at one another in disbelief. The pastor sat motionless. His face had gone pale. By the time the recording ended, the atmosphere inside the church had completely changed. People began shouting. Others argued among themselves. Several people stood up and demanded explanations. The church had never witnessed anything like it. Victoria slowly picked up the microphone one final time. I only wanted him to take responsibility. Her voice trembled slightly, but he chose to threaten me instead. Without waiting for a response, she dropped the microphone. Then she calmly walked down from the altar. Nobody tried to stop her as she made her way towards the exit. When she finally stepped outside, the entire auditorium exploded into confusion. The service could not continue. Members gathered in small groups throughout the church premises. Everyone was discussing the same thing. Some believed Victoria immediately. Others struggled to accept what they had heard. But one thing was certain. Nobody could ignore the recording. The pastor quietly left through a side exit before the service ended. For the first time in many years, he looked like a broken man. When he arrived home, things became even worse. His wife was waiting for him. The moment he entered the house, she confronted him. For years, she had stood by him. She had defended him whenever accusations surfaced. She had ignored rumors and chosen to trust him. But this time was different. The evidence was impossible to explain away. As the arguments continued, years of buried frustration poured out. She reminded him of previous allegations involving women in the church. At the time, she had refused to believe them. Now she wasn't so sure anymore. Tears filled her eyes as she spoke. I spent years defending you. The pastor remained silent. I covered your mistakes. I protected your reputation. Her voice broke. And this is how you repay me? The room fell silent. Then she said the words he feared most. I have had enough. She walked into their bedroom and began packing her belongings. The pastor watched helplessly. For the first time, he realized how much damage he had caused. A few hours later, his wife left the house. The news spread quickly. The scandal became the talk of the community. Within days, attendance at the church dropped significantly. Some members stopped coming entirely. Others transferred to different churches. Several leaders quietly resigned. Invitations to preach disappeared. His reputation, which had taken decades to build, was crumbling before his eyes. And that was only the beginning of his troubles. The scandal had damaged the pastor's reputation, but he wasn't ready to accept defeat. Every day, he watched his ministry shrink. In his mind, Victoria was responsible for everything, and he wanted revenge. A few weeks after the scandal, he secretly contacted some dangerous men and instructed them to deal with Victoria. He wanted to scare her into silence permanently. What he didn't know was that Victoria was no longer in town. She had traveled to a village to spend a few days with her family and clear her head. 2 days later, she returned. The moment she opened the door to her apartment, she knew something was wrong. Drawers had been pulled open. Clothes were scattered across the floor. Someone had clearly gone through the entire house looking for her. Victoria slowly looked around the room. She didn't need someone to tell her who was responsible. Immediately, she picked up her phone and called the pastor. The moment he answered, she spoke. If anything like this happens again, you will regret ever crossing my path. The pastor was stunned by her boldness. Then he became furious. Who was Victoria to threaten him? A poor, struggling girl, a nobody. Yet, she was speaking to him as though she had power over him. The call ended, but his anger only grew stronger. This time, he ordered his men to monitor her movements. They followed her for days. They learned her routine. They watched where she went. They waited patiently. Then one night, they decided to strike. Under the cover of darkness, they entered her compound. The lights inside were off. Everything suggested she was home. In fact, they had personally seen her enter the house earlier that evening. Convinced she was inside, they quietly forced their way in. Victoria was asleep on her bed when she suddenly heard strange noises. At first, she thought she was dreaming. Then she heard footsteps, voices. Immediately, she opened her eyes. Her heart began to race. But she remained perfectly still and listened. Soon, they entered her bedroom. Victoria watched them, 3 men, moving around her room, searching everywhere, yet none of them could see her. It was as if she wasn't there. Victoria lay silently on the bed, staring at them in disbelief. One of the men walked so close that he almost brushed against the mattress. Still, he didn't see her. The men continued searching the bedroom, the kitchen, the bathroom, every corner of the house. Yet they couldn't find her. One of the men became frustrated. "I am telling you, I saw her entering this house." "So did I," another replied. "Then where is she?" They searched again. Nothing. The men grew increasingly nervous. One eventually called the pastor. "We can't find her, Pastor." "What do you mean you can't find her?" The pastor snapped from the other end. "She entered the house. We all saw her enter." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Another lowered his voice. "This is strange. She should be here." A third man muttered nervously. "Maybe this woman is not ordinary. We all saw her come inside. She should be sleeping here." The room suddenly fell silent. None of them could explain what was happening. Victoria heard every word. Yet, she remained on her bed, watching them move around her house, as if she had vanished into thin air. After several more minutes of searching, the men finally gave up. One by one, they hurried out of the house. A few moments later, Victoria heard their footsteps fade into the distance. Only then did she relax. A slow smile spread across her face. The following Sunday, the pastor prepared to preach. The church looked different now. Many seats were empty. Several members had left after the scandal. The atmosphere no longer carried the excitement it once had. Still, the pastor stepped onto the altar and began his sermon. His message that day was about God's mercy. He spoke confidently. Members listened quietly. Then suddenly, he laughed. At first, nobody thought much of it. Some assumed he was reacting to something amusing. A few members even laughed along with him. But the laughter continued and continued. The pastor couldn't stop. His laughter grew louder and louder. Soon, he was clutching his stomach. The congregation looked at one another in confusion. Something was wrong. But the pastor kept laughing. Minutes passed, still laughing. People began whispering. Panic slowly spread through the auditorium. Some members stood up. Others moved closer to the altar. The ushers rushed forward. They tried to calm him down. The pastor struggled against them while laughing uncontrollably. Prayer warriors surrounded him. They prayed. They shouted. But nothing changed. The laughter continued. Before long, the service had completely collapsed into confusion. The pastor was eventually rushed to the hospital. Doctors examined him. No clear explanation emerged. Days turned into weeks. His condition remained the same. He laughed during the day. He laughed at night. No treatment seemed to help. Specialists were consulted. Different medications were prescribed. Nothing worked. Eventually, he was transferred to a psychiatric facility. Days passed. The once respected preacher was now permanently confined to a psychiatric hospital. News of his condition spread rapidly. Some people said it was stress. Others believed it was punishment from God. Many simply shook their heads and moved on with their lives. When Victoria heard the news, she smiled. For the first time in a long time, she felt satisfied. She remembered the day she traveled to her village after discovering that someone had searched her apartment. She remembered sitting with her father and telling him everything that had happened, how the pastor had taken advantage of her, how he threatened her, how men had been sent after her. Her father had listened quietly without interrupting. When she finished speaking, he simply nodded. Victoria knew her father well. He was respected throughout the village for what he did. People traveled from different places to seek his help, and according to many villagers, there was hardly a problem he could not solve. Now, as she listened to reports about the pastor's strange condition, she could not help but smile again. She knew her father was good at what he did. As the most feared spiritualist in his village, he had done it once more, and this time, his target would spend the rest of his life laughing. Do you think Victoria went too far, or did the pastor deserve what happened to him? I'd like to know in the comment section.